Welcome to Monday. It is March 29th. It is the Monday of Holy Week. We made it. We are making our way down towards Easter. We are almost there. And I will remind you here just a couple of housekeeping items that we will be having in-person worship services on Monday, Thursday, and on Good Friday, as well as Easter. Easter, we have two services planned, limited in terms of how many folks we can have in there, but we're having our services at 9 o'clock and 10:30 on Easter morning. I invite you to go to our website, sign up, and so that you can reserve a spot there. Some of you probably have not done that because you feel like you don't want to be taking somebody else's spot. Don't worry about that. We've had plenty of room. I think we will have plenty of room. People are not knocking down the doors yet to get in for Easter or any other service at this point. But if you've had one or both of your shots, I would suggest that you ought to think seriously about coming back into in-person live worship. So we'll be there, and I hope you will be too. This is the last now of our Lenten Bible studies, Words of Life. We are concluding it now today. There will not be a Bible study on Wednesday, and there probably will not be one next week either, because I think I'm going to be taking the week off. We'll see how that works out, but that's my intention anyway. I also need to figure out what I'm going to do next in terms of the next Bible study. But even once we get things opened totally back up, I think Facebook Bible study by myself is here to stay, simply because it's just handier for people instead of having to be at a certain place at a certain time, like the church, for example. You can call this up at your leisure. I can basically, do a live stream and then put it in the archives at my convenience as well. And there it is for you to use anytime that you want. It also reaches a broader audience, I think, that way. So doing it this way, a Bible study on Facebook live stream, I think is going to be, at least for the rest of my tenure, is going to be a regular thing. We probably won't have one during the summer months, but 8-9 months out of the year, this is what I think we're going to be able to do. So this is the last of this particular series, Words of Life, on the 10 Commandments. We're up to the 10th commandment, that means then, which is, you shall not covet. Oh, Exodus chapter 20, verse 17. And in other words, we're going to be talking about keeping up with the Joneses. Okay. When I was in Cresco, Iowa, up northeast, I had served two churches there. I had the in-town church in Cresco, which would be Cresco First. And then I had the little out in the country church, Zion, out on Golden Ridge, about 8 miles out of town. Lovely little white frame church that was out there and sat on Golden Ridge, and you looked off to the north and you were looking across the upper Iowa River Valley, which was just a real scenic, nice setting. I always enjoyed going out there. I'd go out there early and just kind of stand out by the church and look to the north and look across the valley, the woods and everything. It just was a very pastoral setting that I really enjoyed. I had a couple out there, and they were married almost 80 years. Not quite. I think they made it to 79 when he passed away, and I think he was 100, 101. And the wife is still going strong. I think she was maybe a year younger than he is. So this is like 6-7 years ago since he went home to be with the Lord. So, and from what I understand, she's just still chugging along, just about as good as ever. And so, but they were asked one time, that's a long time to be married, almost 80 years. Wow, hanging out with the same person that long. And they were always together. You always saw them together. That's not a record. The longest married couple right now, the record is 86 years. That's John and Ann Batar. And Adam Hamilton cites them as an example in the book. And he passed away when he was 107, and she passed a few months after he did. But when you get to be, you know, around that long, and married that long, people want to talk to you and interview you. And he was asked one time what the secret was to their long marriage, to the longevity of their marriage. And he said, live within your means and be content. Wow. Simple advice, but actually pretty good advice when you stop and think about it. Content. Be content. Now that's interesting. Being content is not always a virtue. I am content right now with the amount of exercise that I am getting, which is pretty much zero. And that is not a good thing. I was, up until about 7 years ago, I was a workout warrior. I was in good shape. I had my weight down about where I wanted it. I was either out jogging on the street or on the treadmill probably 5 days a week. I was lifting weights and I was doing good. But injuries and old age, more injuries more than anything, just got me to the point where I just couldn't do it anymore. And now I'm practically at zero. Most exercise I get is walking from the parsonage to the office these days, and I'm content with that. I think that has to do with Newton's first laws, which were the laws of inertia and the laws of motion. Newton's first law of motion is that an object in motion tends to stay in motion unless acted upon by an outward force. And the law of inertia is a body at rest tends to stay at rest unless acted upon by an outside force. I am a body at rest right now, and I am content with that, and there are no outward forces that are motivating me to move much more than what I actually am. So, contentment. So that their contentment is not a virtue at all. And there are other times when being content is not a virtue. But by and large, the 10th commandment is about contentment, being content with what you have. King Tut, y'all recognize the name King Tut. King Tut's tomb was excavated many years ago, back in the 1920s, by an archaeologist. I think his name was Warren Carter. And it was one of the few tombs of the pharaohs that was found intact because most of them had been broken into and looted over the years, because people knew that part of the funeral arrangement for pharaohs and the Egyptian religion is that they would load up the tomb with things that they thought the deceased would need and use in the afterlife. So when they opened up King Tut's tomb, they found in there over 5,398 items. You know, it was an archaeological gold mine. There was his casket, his coffin, was solid gold. Can you imagine that? There were 6 chariots in there. There were multiple gold-plated couches. There was fabulous jewelry. And there was more, lots more. And you go, wow, what in the world is that? Well, it's covetousness, for one thing. John Batar talked about contentment. He was referring probably mainly to material possessions, but I'm thinking that he might also have been talking about something else. I think he might have been talking about his relationship with his wife. They decided that they were going to be content and happy with one another and with the relationship that we have. Now, we're down to the last commandment. And actually, the first commandment and the last commandment form a bracket because both of them deal with the human heart. but they do so coming at it from different angles, different perspectives. The first command is, you shall have no other gods before me. And the last deals with some of those other gods, literally, some of those other gods that we as humans have a bad habit of worshiping. Coveting is often the motivation behind the reason why we violate all those other commandments. Covetousness, for example, can be a form of idolatry, right? It can lead us to misuse God's name, right? It could lead us to work on the Sabbath or dishonor our parents, or it can be a central motivation for infidelity, adultery, theft, even giving false testimony. It's right down there at the heart of things. Now, some faiths, Christian faiths, Catholic versus Protestant, for example, Catholic versus Eastern Orthodox, for example, some faiths divide this commandment up into two parts. They separate it, and actually, we should actually read it here, so we have it here. Do not testify falsely against your neighbor. Okay, so there you are. And let me just get my stuff here is all spread out. You probably noticed I'm over at the parsonage again today, and the reason being I got ants in the office, and so the exterminator was coming in this afternoon, and I don't think it's a good idea to be sitting around in an office and with ant poison having been sprayed around. So we're going to let things settle before I go back over there tomorrow. So we're talking about covetousness and how Catholicism and and Judaism as well will divide up this particular commandment. They divide up the idea of not coveting your neighbor's wife and property. Now, we don't do that because we know that in the ancient world, when the commandments were first given, and even into the days of Jesus and beyond, we know that wives were considered property. They were on the same level as someone's mule, ox, donkey, whatever the case may be. They were not considered people, they were considered property. So what do we do with this? Because it also tends to endorse not only the idea of subjugating women, it also endorses the whole idea of slavery. It's part of what we call the cultural context within which these commandments were given. In fact, the whole Bible was written in. But it's also part of our faith, the timeless faith that we have in God. So if you see the whole idea of equality, for example, between the genders, men and women, in Genesis chapter 1, you see that man and women were created as co-equals. Now you get into Genesis 2 and you have the different version of the creation story where woman is created out of man. And I tend to go with the first creation story where they're created there in equal parts to be equal with one another. And so I think that whole idea rules out any idea of ownership or women being subordinate to men or being able to own another person as property. I just don't think that's part of the will of God. There are some people, you go back into the antebellum South before the Civil War, and there were preachers that, using biblical texts, preached and proclaimed that the Bible endorsed slavery, and that slavery was right and that it was good. They also considered African Americans to be less than human, and that it was good because of that, the South was able to prosper. At least some people of the South were able to prosper because their whole agricultural system was labor intensive. It was based on slavery. One person could not do everything that needed to be done in terms of growing cotton or any kind of row crop as far as that goes. And so the preachers were able to take various aspects of Scripture and say, Bible endorses slavery. which is one reason why not only did the nation split in late 1860, 1861 with the Civil War, the churches split. The Methodist Church split north, south, and didn't come back together until 1939. The Presbyterian Church split north and south. And there were others, same thing happened. So coveting deals with the desire to have what we do not have, what we cannot have, maybe what we should not have. And this is kind of a guardrail for us, guardrail for society, to keep society from going off the rails here in terms of, well, if I want what you have and I'm going to take it. Okay, we have laws, not only the commandments, we have laws saying you cannot do that. And coveting is wrong. Now, where does all this come from? The Hebrew word for covet is the Hebrew word shamad, and it means to strongly desire something, to desire it so much that you're willing to do anything to possess that particular thing. In the book of Deuteronomy, which Deuteronomy means is the second giving of the law, Deutero, second, onomy, meaning the law, and it's given, the law is given the second time because it's a new generation of Israel that's getting ready to go into the promised land. And in Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 21, the second command, the 10th commandment is given the second time here. And shamad is used in the first line where it talks about, and it refers to a wife. But in the second line, when it is referring to house and other possessions, it's not the Hebrew word shamad that's used. It's the Hebrew word avah, and which is used and better translated to mean craving. Have you ever craved something so much, someone or something, that you were willing to figure out just about any way possible to get it, to take it? You see it in little kids at an early age. They grab a toy away from a playmate. Mine! That's covetousness. You see several examples of it in the Bible. David coveted Bathsheba, and that covetousness led to not only the sin of adultery, but also the sin of murder with Uriah the Hittite, the husband, being murdered by David. Ahab coveted Naboth's vineyard. Now, if you're not familiar with that story, let me just read it for you real quick. Ahab was the king of Israel, and Naboth had a vineyard right close to the palace. Naboth wanted that vineyard. He wanted to turn it into a vegetable garden. And he went and he offered Naboth a good price for it. And Naboth said, no, this has been in my family for generations. I don't want to sell it. And so the king basically threw a hissy fit and turned his face to the wall, wouldn't get out of bed or wash or eat or anything else. His wife is Jezebel, and she's a bad one. And she says to him, aren't you the one who rules Israel? Get up, eat some food, and cheer up. I'll get Naboth's vineyard for you myself. And so she wrote letters in Ahab's name, putting his seal on them, and she sent them to the elders and the officials who lived in the same town as Naboth. And this is what she wrote. Announce a fast and place Naboth at the head of the people. Then bring in two liars, in front of him and have them testify as follow. You cursed God and the king. Then take Naboth outside and stone him so that he dies. And that's in 1 Kings 21, verses 7 through 10. And that's exactly what happened. Because the king coveted a vineyard, Jezebel has Naboth murdered. She was a nasty one. Chamad, the Hebrew word chamad, is also first used in the Adam and Eve story regarding how Eve coveted, desired the fruit of the tree that was forbidden. Well, what happens when you really desire something? You really, really want it, and you can't have it? Well, that's one thing that you should never tell anybody. You can't have that. Right away, you want it all the more. And in Romans chapter 7, Paul says this about this. He says, I would not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, you shall not covet. But sin, seizing an opportunity in the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. The serpent, in the Adam and Eve story, helped in the situation by pointing out all the good things and why, you should really, really like that and desire that, and you should have that, and God doesn't want you to have it because God doesn't want you to be like Him. So, all the more reason to covet after it. Because when you covet what you are coveting, you can rationalize to yourself and you can really make sense. What the devil said made sense. And so there you go. Now, the forbidden fruit story is not just a rehearsal of ancient history for us. That's a story that's intended to teach us about ourselves. We know certain things are off limits to us, and they're off limits to us for our own good. But we chafe at it anyway. Adam and Eve, as a result, they lost paradise, didn't they? They were gone. Everybody out of the pool. Giving in to covetousness can do exactly the same thing to us. It is usually also the deeper motivation, I think I said this before, behind breaking a lot of the other commandments. It kind of goes hand in glove with that. Now, what does the New Testament say about covetousness? Remember now, the New Testament is not written in Hebrew. It's written in Greek and Aramaic. And the Greek language has several words that are used to describe covetousness. Pleonexa is one of the common words. It's a compound word. The word pleon, which means more, and exo, which means to have. To have more. I want more. So pleonexa is the insatiable desire for more. Forever is never enough. More. It's never enough. And it usually gets translated either covetousness or avarice or greed. If you look at Luke chapter 12, verse 15, Jesus says this. He says, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. Oh, okay. Jesus is warning us here not to give in, not to believe the lie that life consists of an abundance of possessions. Remember the old line, the one who dies with most toys. That's all there is to it. Your life is not made up by the abundance of your possessions. Our whole economy, really, in America is built on this. Commercials, marketing, are designed to persuade us to do what? Buy. Buy this, buy this. You want this car. You want this face cream. You want to go to this fast food place. And we struggle with that. And what that is capitalism. And commercials are designed to persuade us to buy. And capitalism and marketing are usually brilliant. One reason people tune into the Super Bowl and the men's NCAA tournament is to watch the commercials, because they always trot out the new commercials, and they're funny, they're entertaining, but they are designed to get you to buy and to fuel the engine of capitalism. It's based on innovation and constant improvement, and it creates jobs, it creates opportunity, but it also is fueled by the idea that we never have enough. We always need to upgrade, get the next best phone. Our phone is better. Our system is better. Get this computer. The computer you have is junk. You got to have ours. One example. This is some years ago, back in the 80s. I had I had three churches. One of them was a country church, and farmers, all farmers, and one farmer over a couple of sections was chairman of the congregation, and another one, a little closer to the church, was church treasurer. And I drove into his yard one day for talk about something about the finances of the church, and I saw that he had a brand new John Deere tractor sitting out there with all the bells and whistles. And I looked it over and wow, that's really nice, but don't you have a couple of tractors that really aren't that old out there in the barn in the building somewhere? He says, well, yeah. I said, well, why did you go out and buy a new one? Because I knew these things aren't cheap. He says, well, neighbor across the way went and got one. Got to keep up with the Joneses. Even farmers got to keep up with the Joneses. My neighbor got a new tractor. Well, then I better go and get one too. Marketing. It's geared to appeal to our sense of covetousness. I got to have. Now, there's nothing wrong with this. I'm not badmouth this and this until we realize it's a form of manipulation. Yes, it is. And, who really does have the best fried chicken sandwich? Yeah, do I really want to know? Do I really care? And yet, everybody's talking about them. Jesus compares this whole idea to the story of the sower. You remember that story. The seed is the word of God that the sower, who is Jesus, is preaching and spreading around. And let's just read a little bit of that here. As for the seed that was spread among thorny plants, this refers to those who hear the word, but the worries of this life and the false appeal of wealth choke the word, and it bears no fruit. And elsewhere Jesus tells his followers, no household servant can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be loyal to one and have contempt for the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. Wow. Oh. Now, is this an issue? Is this a problem these days? Well, is it really all? And you remember, Jesus talked more about money, wealth, finances, covetousness, probably as much, if not more so, than anything else in all the Gospels. Yeah, I know now, I just quit preaching and done gone to meddling, but he does. He talks about it a lot. Paul talks about it a lot in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 9 and 10. He says, those who want to be rich fall into temptation and are trapped by many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. And in their eagerness to be rich, some have wandered away from the faith and have pierced themselves with many pains. Wow, pierced themselves with many pains. Why? Because of covetousness. So, we have all these warnings in the New Testament, and we've got the commandment. Is it really a problem in our society today? Well, remember as kids, I do, maybe I hope you do too, that around a month or so, month and a half before Christmas every year, what would come in the mail? The catalogs, the Sears catalog, the J.C. Penney catalog, Montgomery Ward, what we called the wish books. And as kids, we would sit down and we would go through those, and let's get away from the adult stuff. Where are the toys? Where are the things that I'm really interested in? And we would spend so much time going through the wish book. Wow. Wishing, coveting, exactly what it was. In the year 2019, just a couple years ago, the average American family had a credit card debt of over $8,500. Car loans in the last, well, let's see, when did I get my first car? I bought my first car in the summer of 1973. It was a 36-month loan, and that was the max. And what are they talking about now? 72 months, 84 months? I've heard it advertised now, 84 months on a car loan. Who keeps a car that long? Today, and that's just in the last, well, let's see, how long, 50 years. That's not a long time. And that's one reason is because the price of cars just keeps going up and up and up. I had a pickup at one time. That would have been back in 2008 or so. I had a Chevy Silverado, a pickup, and I liked it. And it was an automatic, wasn't anything fancy. And between 2008 and now, the price of that pickup has almost tripled. Maybe 2.5 times what I paid for that one. Whoa, and that's just 15 years? Price of stuff's going up. But a lot of this is fueled by covetousness. Car dealers, car makers, banks, whatever the case may be, they wouldn't be doing this if there wasn't a market for it, if people weren't willing to bite on that. And that was one of the big problems at the height of the pandemic, when all of a sudden people were losing their jobs, people were living literally paycheck to paycheck, being able to keep up with their credit card debt and all of their other indebtedness, and finding out that, holy cow, I'm in a pickle here. So why, and the scripture says in Isaiah 55, verse 2, why do you spend money on what is not food and what does not satisfy? What do we spend on? Well, I've got to have my hobbies. Okay, I got nothing against hobbies. I don't really have one right now. I suppose I'd better get one or two by the time I retire. I think I'll probably go back to fishing for one thing, but and that's supposedly a harmless, innocuous enough hobby. But and all the things that we desire are not bad. They're not wrong. I'm not mocking that. I'm not knocking that at all. But Scripture talks about God giving us the desires of our hearts. So the desires of our heart, in essence, are not wrong. But when do those desires become wrong? Well, when you are willing to do something that is immoral to get whatever is that particular desire of your heart. Think David, again, in Bathsheba, where David was willing to commit murder to be able to not only have Bathsheba, but also to cover up his sin, because she was pregnant. And everybody would know it wasn't Uriah's baby because he hadn't been home. He'd been off to war. And so questions would get asked, which would eventually get back to the king. So when you're willing to do something immoral, either to get it or to cover up the fact that you got it somehow, some way, it's wrong. When you crave something, or you are so fixated on something or someone, that something that you are not meant to have, something that will harm you or others, then it's wrong. Drugs, alcohol, those kinds of things. They're just not good for you. You may crave them. You may want them. You may feel like You've got to do that in order to be popular. Some people crave, desire, covet popularity. In fact, there's a TV show coming out on one of the cable networks about a young boy going into high school, and the theme of it is that he wants to be popular and he'll do anything to be popular. That's coveting popularity, and that's wrong. That's wrong. When the object that you desire becomes a false god, when it interferes with your ability to take care of people, loved ones. Mick Jagger used to sing the song, well, he probably still does. I can't get no satisfaction. No, I'm not going to sing it for you. I could, but I won't. But and he was talking about it in a sexual sense, but that also goes in an emotional sense, and also in a coveting of material things sense. You know, you buy, you have, and it's never enough. When it gets to that point, then you got a problem, then something's wrong. So, where then is satisfaction found? Well, again, in the book of Isaiah, chapter 55, verses 6 and 7, and then verse 12, the prophet tells us this: Seek Yahweh while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake their way, and the unrighteous their thoughts. Let them return to Yahweh, that he may have mercy on them, and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon. Then you shall go out in joy, and be led back in peace. The mountains and the hills before you shall burst into song, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. The trees of the field shall clap their hands. Satisfaction is found in knowing God, loving God, serving God. St. Augustine said it very famously. He said, speaking to God in prayer, he says, Thou hast made us for thyself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it finds its rest in you. There you go. So that is why the first commandment is there as it is. I am Yahweh, your God. You shall have no other gods before me, no idols before me. That's there. And then it follows it up then with the whole idea ending with covetousness. Jesus said it this way in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 6, verses 25 and 33. He said, don't worry about your life, what you'll eat or what you'll drink, or about your body, what you'll wear. Isn't life more than food and the body more than clothes? Instead, desire first and foremost God's kingdom and God's righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. There you go. Paul says it this way in Philippians chapter 4, verses 12 and 13. He says, I know the experience of being in need and of having more than enough. I have learned the secret to being content, contentment, in any and every circumstance, whether full or hungry, or whether having plenty or being poor. I can endure all these things through the power of the one who gives me strength. There you go. So, how about some antidotes then for coveting? Number one, I would suggest that you develop an attitude of gratitude for what you have. The psalmist says this, give thanks to the Lord, to Yahweh, for he is good. That's Psalm 107, verse 1. It's also Psalm 118, verse 1, Psalm 136, verse 1. So, the psalmist keeps repeating the idea. That means it's a good idea. Also, the Proverbs tells us it is more blessed to give than to receive. Thessalonians says, give thanks in every situation because this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. Give thanks in all things. Give thanks to the Lord for all that he has given us. Also, I would encourage you to consider the whole idea and concept of generosity. As we said, Proverbs 11:25, he says, generous persons will prosper. Those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed. Acts says it's better to give than to receive. Okay? We know that. That's just kind of a basic idea for us. And the last would be the whole idea of loving. Jesus talked about it. We keep going back to the golden rule. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. If you continually strive to put God first, to keep God first in all that you do, covet, if you're going to covet anything, covet God. Covet knowing God, loving God, being led by God, and loving your neighbor as yourself. Therein will be real, true satisfaction. And that then is the 10th commandment. Thou shalt not covet. Shalt not covet your neighbor's wife or his house, his goods, his animals, or anything else. This has been a fun study of the commandments. At least I've enjoyed it. I hope you have too. And so remember, we've got Holy Week services on Thursday night, Friday night, 2 services on Sunday. I hope you come in, take part, be part of the in-person live services together. And in the meantime, as we come now to this Holy Week, I hope the Lord blesses you real good.